Hello everyone, this week we are going to learn the market forces of supply and demand. The first section of this chapter, we will learn lots of definitions to be able to make market analysis. Let's start with the first one, market. Market is a group of buyers and sellers of a particular good or service, and buyers in this group represents the demand for the product, and sellers as a group represents the supply of the product. We have two types of markets, competitive markets. In competitive markets, there are many buyers and many sellers, but each has a very small impact on market price. In perfectly competitive markets, we have, again, competition, but now the goods are exactly the same in this market. So in this market, people are price takers. What does that mean? That means we have too many buyers and sellers that no one can affect the market price. At the market price, buyers can buy all they want and sellers can sell all they want. So the key point here is this, exactly the same good. And there are not many examples of perfectly competitive markets in the economy, but the one that you can understand this definition of perfectly competitive market well is agricultural commodities. Let's think about that a farmer sells rice. So there are many farmers selling the same rice, and therefore they cannot have an impact on the price. In order to charge higher prices, you should differentiate your product. But if you are selling from land, you harvest the rice, it's not too different than the rice the next farmer sells next door. For that reason, in perfectly competitive market, sellers and buyers, everybody is a price taker. At that market price, buyers can buy all they want and sellers can sell all they want. The next definition is quantity demanded. Quantity demanded is the amount of good that buyers are willing and able to purchase. And there is one here, very important theory, law of demand. Other things equal, when the price of good rises, the quantity demanded of the good falls. So this relation, when the price rises, people buy less of that good, is called law of demand. And the reverse is true too. When the price falls, the quantity demanded rises. The next definition is demand schedule. Demand schedule is a table that shows the relationship between the price of a good and quantity demanded. Demand curve is very similar to demand schedule, but demand curve is a graph of the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded. Let's see one example. On the screen you see Sofia's demand schedule for muffins, and at different prices how many muffins she would like to buy. And notice that Sofia's preferences obey the law of demand. While the prices are rising, the quantity demanded goes down. And now let's use this demand schedule to draw the demand curve. We are going to plot the numbers, and prices are on the vertical axis and quantity is on the horizontal. And by plotting the numbers, we draw the demand curve. Let's start with the first one. $0 16 muffins and $1 14 muffins, $2 12 muffins, $3 10, 4 8, and then 5 6 and 6 4. And when you combine all these dots, you will get the demand curve. And again, law of demand, you can see here from the demand curve too, a decrease in price increases the quantity of muffins demanded. That inverse relation is reflected on the demand curve because the demand curve is downward sloping. And the next definition is market demand. Market demand is the sum of all individual demands for a good or service. Market demand curve, you sum the individual demand curves horizontally. To find the total quantity demanded at any price, we add the individual quantities. Let's see this example. Suppose Sofia and Diego are the only two buyers in the market for muffins. And prices given, Sofia's demand schedule is given. And now let's add the Diego's. At $0, Sofia wants to get 16 muffins, Diego 8. So the market quantity demanded is the sum of quantities demanded at each price. 16 plus 8, 24. So $0, the demand is 24. And you continue like that. So the market demand curve is actually very similar to individual demand curve, but the quantities are different. Quantities are higher at each price. Here is the market demand curve. It's again downward sloping. The downward sloping of the demand curve is because of the law of demand. An increase in the price decreases the quantity of muffins demanded. And when there is a change in the price, we move along the demand curve to see the impact. For instance, the price increases from 2 to 4 here, as you see on the screen. And then at $2, you have this much quantity. And then at $4, you have this much quantity. So you move along the demand curve to find out the change in quantity. Next, we talk about demand curve shifters. So before we understand the shifters, we know that the main determinant of demand is price. It's on the vertical axis. And because of that, demand curve is downward sloping. And if the price changes, you move along the curve. Let's say $2, as we see, you move to 4, you move from point A to point B. So that reflects the change in price. But there are other determinants of demand, which we call them as non-price determinants. They are called non-price determinants because these are the determinants other than the price of the good itself. And when they change, then you need to shift the demand curve. And the demand curve only shows how price affects quantity demanded, other things being equal. Now we are going to look at these other things, which are shifters or non-price determinants of demand. Things that determine buyer's demand for a good other than the good's price. And they shift the demand curve. So what are these shifters? We have now 5 shifters here: number of buyers, income of buyers, prices of related goods. Not the price of the good itself, price of related goods like competitive brands. Taste, you can say this as preference to, preferences of buyers, and finally expectations. Let's start with the first one, increase in number of buyers. Increases the quantity demanded at each price, shifts the demand curve to the right. If there is a decrease in number of buyers, decreases the quantity demanded at each price and shifts the demand curve to the left. Suppose the number of buyers increases. Then at each price P and QD, like at $6, 5, 4 and so on, we will increase quantity demanded, let's say by 5 in this example. So at $0, now we have 29. And then you see an increase of 5 at each price. Therefore, the demand curve shifts to the right. So an increase in demand curve is represented by a parallel shift of demand curve to the right. Now, next is changes in income. Changes in income can affect demand in 2 ways. If the good is normal good, other things constant, an increase in income leads to an increase in demand. And that shifts the demand curve to the right. So most of the goods in the economy are normal. That means when you have more income, you buy more of these goods. Inferior good, on the other hand, is different. An increase in income leads to a decrease in demand. Like for instance, let's say you get an offer of 50K today and you are going to start job tomorrow. If that is the case, now you may not choose to get bus to go to school. So bus ticket becomes inferior. Why? Because you have more money, you buy less. And if there is an inferior good, an increase in income shifts the demand curve to the left. Next one is changes in price of related goods. Again, we have 2 types of goods. The 2 goods are substitutes if an increase in the price of one leads to an increase in the demand for the other. Let's say you go to the cafeteria and you find out hamburgers are more expensive. You can substitute with pizza. So what happens? An increase in the price of hamburger lead you to an increase in the demand for pizza. Other examples, Coke and Pepsi, laptops and tablets, movie streaming and movie theater. And the second type of goods are complements. An increase in the price of one leads to a decrease in the demand for the other. For example, smartphones and applications. If price of smartphones rises, people buy fewer smartphones and therefore fewer apps. Other examples, college tuition and textbooks, bagels and cream cheese, milk and cookies. Another example is gas and trucks. When the gas prices increase, people buy less trucks. The next shifter is changes in taste. Anything that causes a shift in taste toward a good will increase demand for that good and shift its demand curve to the right. For example, advertising convinces consumers that drinking 3 glasses of orange juice a day will have lower cholesterol. Demand for orange juice increases. So anything becomes cool, healthy, can be considered under this category. And the final shifter is expectations. People expect an increase in income. The current demand increases. So let's say you get an offer today, but you are going to start the job after graduation in December. You'll start spending today. People expect higher prices. The current demand increases. For instance, if you expect that the flights are going to be expensive during the holiday season, you might consider about buying it or traveling it this time. Example here, if people expect their incomes to rise because they got a promotion at work, their demand for meals at expensive restaurants may increase now. So we need to understand shifts versus movement along the curve. If there is a shift in the demand curve due to non-price determinants, you shift the demand curve to the right or to the left. Then there is a change in demand. Why? Because the whole demand curve is shifting, moving from one place to another. And that usually occurs when a non-price determinant of demand changes, like income or number of buyers. Change in quantity demanded, on the other hand, is due to change in price. Okay? Price of the good itself, a movement along a fixed demand curve, and now you are changing here quantities from Q1 to Q2. That's why it's called change in quantity demanded. Now you can see the summary variables that influence buyers. There is a question here. Let's do this question together. Draw the demand curve for orange juice D1 and the point A, P1, Q1 on the demand curve. Let's do that. This is price, this is quantity. Demand curve is downward sloping, and let's choose a point here. This is P1 and this is Q1. What happens in each of the following scenarios? Why? The price of apple juice increases. So, which market is this? This is orange juice, right? So there is going to be an increase in demand for orange juice. Why? Because now an alternative juice, which is apple juice, is more expensive. That will shift the demand curve to the right. Remember, right shift represents an increase in demand. Shifts the demand curve to the right. So this is A. This is our new demand curve. And this existing price, now people are consuming more goods. Now let's erase this one. And now let's do B. The price of orange juice falls. Start again with Q of orange juice and P of orange juice, and there is a demand curve, D1, and there is P1, and then Q1. Now, price of orange juice falls from P1 to P2, for instance. You don't need to shift the curve, right? Because you can change the price on the vertical axis, and by moving from A to point B, you can see that there is a change in quantity demanded. So the quantity demanded increases. Here, increase in quantity demanded. What was it here? Increase in demand. Now let's do the third one. Consumers' income falls and orange juice is a normal good. Let's start again with initial Q and P, and there is a demand curve here, D1. Now since consumer incomes fall, they buy less of orange juice. Then there is going to be a shift to the left, you see, D2, and that P1 price, now consumption is lower. So there is going to be decrease in demand. Now let's move on supply. Quantity supplied is the amount of a good sellers are willing and able to sell. So I'm going to go faster in this section because now we are looking at the same definitions from the seller's perspective. Law of supply, other things equal, when the price of good rises, P rises, quantity supplied of the good rises. Okay, so this positive relation, you see the arrows, is called law of supply. And the reverse is true too. When price falls, quantity supplied falls as well. Supply schedule is a table that shows the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity supplied. Supply curve is a graph of the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity supplied. Let's see Starbucks supply schedule. As the prices are rising, here, quantity supplied rises as well. Now, supply curve, just you need to plot the numbers 0, 0, and then 1, 3, 2, 6, 3, 9, 4, 12, 5, 15, and 6, 18. And then combine all these points, and this is supply curve. And again, because of law of supply, we have an upward sloping curve. Prices are rising, quantities are rising as well. Market supply, sum of the supplies of all sellers of a good or service. Market supply curve, sum of individual supply curves horizontally. To find the total quantity supplied at any price, we add the individual quantities. Suppose Starbucks and Peet's Coffee are the only two sellers in this market. Price is given, Starbucks supply schedule is given. Now we add Peet's. So the market supply curve is the sum of individual supply at each price. Here is the market supply curve for muffins. It's again upward sloping. The reason it's upward sloping is because, please do not forget, it's because of law of supply. An increase in price increases the quantity of muffins supplied. And when there is a change in the price, let's say the price increases from 3 to 5, there is a movement along the curve from 15 to 25. The same idea. We don't shift the curve because price is here on the vertical axis and you move along the curve. Here one example. You are given firm X, Y, and Z's supply schedule. If these are the only three sellers in the market, then an increase in the market price from $6 to $12 will increase quantity supplied by how many? Let's first find the market supply at $6. At $6, total amount supplied to the market is 4 plus 8 plus 12, which is 24. Now let's find out the market supply at 12. 8 plus 16 plus 24, which is 48. So as you see, the market supply increases from 24 to 48 by 24 units. So this is the answer. Supply curve shifters. Supply curve shows how price affects quantity supplied, other things being equal. These other things, which are non-price determinants of supply, changes in them shift the supply curve. So what are these shifters? Input prices. Just I want to make sure that what we mean when we say input prices, these can be labor cost, which is wage, rent, and the prices of raw materials can be input prices. Technology, number of sellers, expectations about the future. Let's start with the input prices. Wages, prices of raw materials. A fall in input prices when making a product, producing a product, is less costly. It makes production more profitable at each output price. Firms supply a larger quantity at each price and supply curve shifts to the right. So to understand how supply curve shifts to the right or left, you should ask yourself if the change makes the production more profitable or less profitable. If there is a fall in input prices at each prices, production becomes more profitable, therefore supply curve shifts to the right. Here is one example, changes in input prices. Suppose the price of orange falls, which is here in this case orange juice market. Remember, this is the juice market and orange is the input price. If oranges fall, then producing oranges become more cheap and therefore supply increases and the curve shifts to the right. Technology determines how much inputs are required to produce a unit of output. A cost-saving technological improvement has the same effect as a fall in input prices, shift the supply curve to the right. An increase in the number of sellers increases the quantity supplied at each price, shifts the supply curve to the right. A decrease in the number of sellers decreases the quantity supplied at each price, shifts the supply curve to the left. Expectations about future. Example, events in the Middle East lead to expectations of higher oil prices. Owners of Texas oil fields reduce supply now, save some inventory to sell later at the higher price. The supply curve shifts left. Sellers may adjust supply when their expectations of future prices change, but there's a star here, if good, not perishable. Oil is not perishable, so they can store it and sell it when it's more profitable. Shifts versus movement along the supply curve. Change in supply, a shift in the supply curve, and it occurs when a non-price determinant of supply changes, like technology or cost. Change in quantity supplied, a movement along a fixed supply curve, and occurs when the price changes. You can see a summary of variables that influence sellers here on this slide. And now let's do this question. Draw a supply curve for apple juice S1 and the point A, P1, Q1 on the supply curve. What happens to it in each of the following scenarios and why? Let's start with the first one. Let's draw here a supply curve, right? And P is here, Q is here. This is the apple juice, and here apple juice. And let's choose a price P1 and Q1 and point A. First case, grocery stores cut the price of apple juice. You don't need to shift the supply curve because the price is here. You just move along the curve P1 to, let's say, P2. If the price drops, supply is going to go down, which is Q2. Now let's raise this, do the second one. A technological advance allows apple juice to be produced at lower cost. Technology is a non-price determinant. So therefore, we are going to shift the supply curve to the right because it's an increase. Supply is here, P1 is here, and now supply is going to shift to the right. This is the new supply curve. Grocery stores cut the price of orange juice. So if that happens, this is a substitute good, right? Orange juice is a substitute for apple juice. So if that happens, this is not going to affect the sellers. This change is going to affect on buyers. Buyers are going to buy more orange juice, but they buy less of apple juice. And therefore, there is going to be less demand for apple juice. Supply side, none of the determinants has changed. Because of the less demand, the price is going to go down. That's another story. But for now, there is no change on the supply. Therefore, the demand curve for apple juice is going to go down, shifts to the left. You can find the answers here on the slides. As I said, the last one was trick question. Apple juice and orange juice are substitutes, a demand shifter. This shifts the demand curve for apple juice, but not the supply curve. Next topic that we need to understand is the equilibrium. Equilibrium is the point where price has reached the level where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. So at $3, you see the supply is 15 and demand is 15. There is no leftover. Whatever is produced is sold in the market. That's called markets are clearing at this point. Equilibrium price is the price where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. When you look at here to the table, at $3, quantity demanded is 15, quantity supplied is 15, therefore equilibrium price is $3. It's possible that markets are not in equilibrium. For instance, markets misprice the good and it's $5. And at $5, demand is here and supply is here. Read the numbers. Supply is here, demand is here. Supply of muffins is 25, demand for muffins is 9. So there is a surplus. That means every day bakeries are producing extra muffins that goes to garbage, resulting in a surplus of 16 muffins. If that happens, what is going to happen in the market? There's going to be a downward pressure on the prices. Facing a surplus, sellers try to increase sales by cutting the prices. This causes quantity demanded to rise and quantity supply to fall, and which reduces the surplus. But we are not going to stop here. It's going to go until market reaches equilibrium. So there is going to be a downward pressure on prices until we reach to the equilibrium. Let's look at another case where market's not in equilibrium. This time the price is $1, mispriced, and the price is too low. At that $1, now supply is here, demand is here. Demand is 21 muffins and supply is 5 muffins, resulting in a shortage of 16 muffins. So that means there are people waiting in the line to get limited production. That is the case of shortage. If that happens, there's going to be a pressure, upward pressure on the prices. Sellers raise the price, causing demand to fall and supply to increase until we have the market equilibrium. So let's see this example. What is the equilibrium price in this market? Equilibrium price is where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, therefore it's 4. If the market price is $8 here, is there a shortage or surplus in this market? We have quantity demanded 10 and quantity supplied 60. As you see, quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded, therefore we have surplus. How much is the surplus? 60 minus 10, 50. Let's do this example. At a price of $3, is there a shortage or surplus, and how large is the shortage or surplus? At $3, supply is 150 and demand is 250. Supply is 150 and demand is 250. So since demand is higher than supply, we have shortage. And what is the size of the shortage? 250 minus 150, 100. Finally, we come to the last section of this chapter. We will analyze supply and demand together. We will use 3 steps to analyzing changes in equilibrium. The first step, decide whether the event shifts the supply curve, the demand curve, or in some cases both curves. Second, decide whether the curve shifts to the right or to the left. Third, use the supply and demand diagram. Compare the initial and the new equilibrium, effects on equilibrium price and quantity. Let's start with the market for muffins. Price of muffins, quantity of muffins, and there is demand and supply, and there is a market equilibrium, P1 and Q1. Event A, increase in the price of donuts. If there is an increase in the price of donuts, demand curve shifts for muffins. Why? Muffins or donuts are substitutes. And D shifts for muffins to the right because now donuts are more expensive. There is more demand for muffins. Therefore, demand shifts from D1 to D2 to the right. Consumers will buy fewer expensive donuts and switch to muffins. And step 3, now we are comparing the previous equilibrium, which is P1, Q1, with the new one. New one is the intersection of S1 and D2. Only demand curve shifts, nothing has changed in S1, therefore the new equilibrium is P2, Q2. So what do we see? Price is now higher for muffins and more muffins are produced and sold in the market. Now another example, this time it's a shift in supply. New technology of producing muffins is introduced. If that is the curve, this time supply curve shifts because new technology reduces production costs. And supply shifts right because lower production cost makes production more profitable at any given price. Again, there is no change in demand curve. None of the shifters of demand curve has changed. You are going to find initial equilibrium and the new equilibrium with S2 and the previous demand curve. And this point P2, Q2 represents the new equilibrium. And at the end, prices are now lower compared to P1 to P2, but more quantities are sold compare Q1 and Q2 in the market. What if both events happen at the same time? Price of donuts rises and new technology reduces production costs. So both curves are going to shift. Both shift to the right. Demand is going to shift to the right and supply is going to shift to the right. Step 3, in this example, if you compare price and quantity with the initial price and quantity, from the figure we see that there is an increase in price and there is an increase in quantity, but step 3 says on the slide Q rises for sure, but the effect on P is ambiguous. Why we say that? Because in this example, just look at that, demand shifts more than the supply. Okay, demand shifts more than the supply, but we don't know how much they are going to shift. We just know that the direction of the demand is going to be to the right, supply to the right. What if on step 3, supply shifts more than demand? Look, the distance here is much more than the distance here. If that is the case, you see the price is now lower. The new equilibrium price is lower to the initial. So for that reason, we don't know which one shifts more than the other, and in both cases, since Q increases, we will say for sure quantity rises, but the effect on P is ambiguous. If supply increases more than demand, P falls. If demand increases more than supply, P increases. And these are the final slides of this lecture: how prices allocate resources. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. In market economies, prices adjust to balance supply and demand. These equilibrium prices are the signals that guide economic decisions and thereby allocate scarce resources. Here you have one active learning. Let's do it together and finalize this lecture. Suppose we are analyzing the market for hot chocolate. Graphically illustrate the impact each of the following would have on demand or supply. Also show how equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity would change. Winter starts and the weather turns sharply colder. If that is the case, the taste preference of customers will change. Therefore, this is a demand shifter. Let's do that. Let's start with an initial equilibrium. This is D1. This is S1. This is D1. And this is P and Q. Because of this change, people are going to demand more hot chocolate and demand curve is going to shift to the right, D2. And as you see, comparing to initial equilibrium of price and quantity, we have higher prices and higher quantities. P increases, Q increases. There is no change in supply shifters. So for that reason, you are not shifting the supply curve. Okay? Only thing that changes in this market is the demand, and demand shifts to the right. The price of tea, a substitute for hot chocolate, falls. Again, this is a demand shifter, and now tea is cheaper. Therefore, people buy less of hot chocolate. Start with an initial equilibrium, S1 and D1. Let's say it's P1 and Q1. Because of this change, now demand shifts to the left. This is D2. And now look what happens. Now prices and quantities are lower in the market. So P is lower, Q is lower. The price of cocoa beans decreases. This time, this is an input. Okay, this is the input of making chocolate. And now it's cheaper. Now we are talking about a supply shifter. Price, quantity, S1 and D1. Because of this change, supply is going to shift to the right because it's more profitable. Cocoa beans are cheaper. It's cheaper to produce. You see, this is the initial equilibrium. This is P1 and this is P2. Prices are lower. Q1 to Q2, quantities are higher. Prices are lower, quantities will be higher in this market. Producers expect the price of hot chocolate to increase next month. This is producers' expectation. So we're talking about a shifter in the supply. And producers expect the price of hot chocolate to increase next month. Therefore, next month, hot chocolate is more profitable. How about this month then? This month you are going to keep the hot chocolate in the inventory. You don't want to supply or sell to the market. Therefore, here is P, here is Q. There is going to be a decrease in supply today. Supply shifts to the left. And because of that shift, now let's compare the prices. Prices are going to be higher. P2 is higher. And then the quantities will be lower. Q1 to Q2. Quantity will be lower. And there is one example here, shifts in supply and demand. Use the three-step method to analyze the effects of each event on the equilibrium price and quantity of orange juice. A fall in the price of apple juice. Event B, the price of oranges declines because of an abundant orange crop. Event C, events A and B both occur simultaneously. Let's do event A. A fall in price of apple juice. Apple juice is a substitute good for orange juice, so it's a demand shifter. Demand curve shifts to the left, and P and Q both fall because of this change. Now let's look at the second case, fall in the price of oranges. Orange is an input for orange production, therefore supply curve shifts to the right, and P falls, Q rises because of this change. And if both events happen together, both curves shift, D shifts left and S shifts right, and P falls, Effect on Q is ambiguous. The fall in demand reduces quantity, the increase in supply increases quantity.